We will be completely upfront with you. This next conversation, this next story is a really difficult one. It involves one man's tragic and ultimately deadly spiral from a loving father to a cold-blooded murderer. He killed his wife. He murdered the family dog. He shot one of his own daughters. And then he died in a shootout with police. His youngest daughter wasn't home when it happened, but she says she knows why it happened. An unhealthy obsession with the QAnon conspiracy theory community that developed in the aftermath of the 2020 election. Maybe it's a cautionary tale, if there ever was one, with dire warnings for the very near future. Because with each passing day, it seems Donald Trump's embrace and lifting up of the toxic cult-like movement gets tighter and tighter. They get closer and closer. Let's bring into our coverage NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard.
Nicole, there are thousands, if not millions, of Americans who have gone down this rabbit hole of the QAnon movement, dating back to 2017 when it really percolated. But for such a long time, most of us had seen it really as a fringe element of the far right. But one can't say that anymore, because over the last month, the former president, Donald Trump himself, has begun to overtly embrace this entanglement of QAnon conspiracy theories. Take a look.
It seems like this when Donald Trump's embrace of QAnon became clear.
We will fight for America like no one has ever fought before.
The former president at rallies over the last week, closing with the song.
And in no condition to lead our country.
The music, I think it's where we go one, we go all.
That's the title of the QAnon conspiracy movement theme song. And Trump has reposted a flurry of QAnon memes on his social media account. But now QAnon's conspiracy theories have become vast and violent.
I believe he has the military behind him, and I believe that he's going to be gone.
What does that mean, gone?
He's going to go to jail for treason.
Will the military help Donald Trump with that? What does that look like?
Yes, that's what I believe.
The movement believes there's a cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles and hopes that Donald Trump will wage a secret battle with the military to reclaim power, arresting and even executing government officials, Democrats, Hollywood figures, and other elites.
Do you believe Democratic leaders should be executed?
Anybody that's treason.
The reach of the QAnon movement is enormous. And you're seeing the ideas of QAnon worm their way into places that they never would have before.
But the QAnon movement has become more than memes, slogans in internet rabbit holes.
My dad thought that he'd carry out martial law.
Donald Trump would.
Yeah.
21-year-old Rebecca and other close family members say her father grew isolated working from home during the pandemic and became so obsessed with QAnon that he grew paranoid.
He got a gun and tried to kill everyone in my family, and he would have tried to kill me too if I was there.
On September 11th, he killed Rebecca's mother, the family dog, and shot her sister. He was then killed in a standoff with police, who say they are investigating any specific motive, which is yet to be determined.
How was your dad before this?
He was a totally different person, and I can say I think I started grieving him before this happened. I started realizing that he's not the same person I grew up with.
The once fringe movement festered after the 2020 election as followers baked new conspiracies.
People don't have to be on 4chan. They don't have to be on 8chan to follow QAnon. It has seeped into other parts of the far-right ecosystem.
We the people make up Q.
We've all been waiting and we're ready.
I think there are a lot of families who are impacted by this, and nobody takes it seriously.
What would be your message to Donald Trump?
I just think you should have some integrity and try to denounce these people.
Nicole, this is a dangerous, dangerous path that Donald Trump is embracing here. We're talking about folks that are expecting at some point the military to come in and pull off mass arrests, send these individuals to Guantanamo Bay, and then execute them. But we've also seen family members, friends, Rebecca's father, that have gone down this dark path of isolation, the rabbit holes that have led them to be removed from reality. And that is the most dangerous element of what the QAnon conspiracy movement is. But then there's the next layer of it, and that is where you see Donald Trump over the last month embracing a movement that is fueled by these grand conspiracy theories. And in so many ways, the QAnon movement and those conspiracy theories are at the heart of his campaign efforts here, when we're talking about the fantasy that is the rigged 2020 election, when we're talking about the fantasy that is, you know, the idea that there are groomers sexualizing children, when we're talking about the fantasy that is the deep state that is somehow part of a cabal seeking to undermine Donald Trump and the Republican Party, those are at the root of the QAnon movement. Donald Trump, by embracing them, is essentially sending these foot soldiers out to not only spread these words and legitimize them to their friends, their family members, but also within their churches. You see right-wing media continue to propagate these conspiracy theories, and it is only leading to a more increasingly dangerous place. And as you heard Rebecca said, she's concerned about other families facing similar situations as her. And we need to be clear, there have already been other killings associated with individuals who went down the dark tunnel of QAnon. There's been kidnappings. This is a serious situation, and Donald Trump is doubling down by the decision to play not only the music at that rally here over this weekend, but also consistently posting these QAnon themes with him at the center of it all. Nicole?
Vaughn, you are very well sourced in Republican and Trumpian politics. Have you met any Republicans that have denounced QAnon?
I think number one to that question, Nicole, is that nobody has directly come out over the last month to say into the microphone that they denounce the QAnon movement and Donald Trump's embrace of it. One of our producers on Capitol Hill last week did go and get the chance to ask Josh Hawley, and he said, sure, he'd denounce it. It sounds wild to him. But that is a far cry from understanding just how serious this is, and the Republican Party taking a stand against what's thousands or even millions of their followers wrapping their arms around.
Charlie, I'm slow to the story. I'm far from you know, at the front of covering it or of lifting up and showcasing Vaughn's incredible reporting. But I'm not sure there's anything more dangerous right now in our politics than QAnon becoming mainstream by one of the two major political parties.
No, Nicole. You know, you mentioned what a danger Donald Trump is to national security. We know what a threat he poses to American democracy, but the real clear and present danger right now, which can hardly be overstated, is the way that he is force-feeding this kind of insanity into our political culture. And the only reason that we are talking about this now, the only reason we're talking about a conspiracy theory that argues that the world is run by a cabal of Satan-worshiping pedophiles and that Donald Trump is a messiah figure is because Donald Trump himself is embracing this, encouraging this, giving oxygen to this very, very toxic idea. So when we talk about the polarization of American politics, that understates it because, and it's also not appropriate to call this just crazy. What you are talking about is a viciously wild conspiracy theory that is dementing individuals, but also look at the effect that it's having. The people believe that the military is going to overthrow the president, arrest Democrats, take them to Guantanamo Bay, and then execute them, and that this is what people fantasize about, the death of their political opponents. It is, you cannot overstate the danger that this poses to our political culture and our national.